What if the Sahara is not merely a desert, but a veil, an immense, shifting cloak that hides something older, something forgotten beneath its golden dunes? For most of us, the Sahara is a landscape of silence, endless waves of sand, broken only by the mirage of heat, the rare oasis, and the occasional caravan. But it was not always this way. Once the Sahara was green, its horizons broken by rivers and lakes, its air thick with clouds, its soil alive with animals and plants. Beneath the scorching sands of today lies a memory of abundance. Now pause for a moment. Imagine standing at the edge of the desert at dawn. The air is cool, the sun a thin line trembling above the dunes. What you see is vast emptiness. Yet what if, deep below your feet, there are the remnants of a civilization, cities drowned not by water, but by sand? A people who once walked where you now stand, leaving behind temples, gardens, or even technologies we no longer recognize. Could their story still linger, preserved in stone, or dissolved into the desert's chemistry, waiting for us to uncover it? This is not a tale of fantasy. It is a question rooted in science and humility. For Earth is old, far older than our species, far older than the ruins we call ancient. The Sahara itself is a shapeshifter. 10,000 years ago, it was a savanna. 20,000 years ago, it was a desert again. Across hundreds of thousands of years, its climate has swung between extremes, sometimes green, sometimes barren, wiping clean whatever stood before. If civilizations rose during those fertile windows, their remains may now lie erased, their memory swept away by wind and time. We tend to think of deserts as eternal, yet deserts are fleeting, measured in geological time. The Sahara is only a few million years old in its modern form, a blink in the age of the Earth. And in that blink, entire chapters of history could have been written, read, and erased. What we see today is the latest page, not the whole book. Scientists, archaeologists, and geologists remind us of a humbling truth. Rock is the memory of Earth. Every stone, every grain of sand is a fragment of time's library. And like any library, its shelves are incomplete, its books eroded, its chapters missing. When we gaze at the Sahara, we see silence, but perhaps that silence is only apparent. Perhaps beneath the surface lies a whisper of something more. Picture a lost city, swallowed not by the sea but by sandstorms. Its walls collapse under weight of dunes, its streets vanish under drifting layers. Its people scatter to the winds. After centuries, the desert hardens, burying stone, pottery, even bones, under a shifting skin of dunes. After millennia, erosion smooths away the last hints of geometry. And after tens of thousands of years, the only record left is not a wall or a statue, but a chemical fingerprint locked in sediment, an echo too subtle for human eyes. The question we must ask is simple, but profound. If the Sahara did cradle a civilization long before ours, how would we ever know? Would we expect monuments like the pyramids, still standing after thousands of years? Or would time's erasure be so complete that we must learn to search differently, not for objects, but for signals, faint markers embedded in stone and soil? And this leads us to wonder, are we mistaking silence for absence? When we say there is no evidence of civilizations beneath the desert, what we mean is not that none existed, but that none have been found. And in a desert that stretches over 3.5 million square miles, hiding rivers, fossils, and even meteor craters, what has not been found is vast. So let us begin, with patience and humility, to step into this desert of imagination. Not to prove that a civilization once existed here, but to honor the possibility that Earth is older, deeper, and more mysterious than the stories we tell ourselves. Because in the end, the Sahara is not just a desert, it is a question written in sand. If a hidden civilization truly lies beneath the Sahara's sands, how would we ever know? This is the heart of the question. The desert is vast, stretching from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, from the Mediterranean to the Sahel. It is not only the largest desert on Earth, but one of the harshest. Shifting dunes, relentless winds, and scorching heat make exploration difficult. And yet, the challenge runs deeper still. For even if something extraordinary lies buried there, time itself conspires to hide it. Think about how we usually detect the past. Archaeologists seek ruins, artifacts, bones. Historians rely on writing, inscriptions, records etched into clay or stone. But what happens when those records vanish? What if nothing survived the desert's transformations? Would we still recognize the existence of a lost people? Or would we conclude that silence means emptiness? It is easy to forget how much of our own story could be erased. Imagine if our cities, Cairo, Marrakesh, Timbuktu, were abandoned today. Within a few centuries, the sand would begin to claim them. Buildings would collapse under their own weight. Iron would rust. Glass would splinter into dust. Within 1,000 years, many of our structures would be gone. Within 10,000, nearly everything recognizable would have vanished. What would remain after 100,000 years? Perhaps only faint chemical disturbances in the soil, carbon signals, traces of metal, subtle anomalies locked in rock. If that is true for us, why would it not also be true for others? If people had once risen in the Sahara's green past, farming its fertile valleys, constructing towns along its vanished rivers, their memory might today be hidden not in monuments, but in sand itself. There is a name for this kind of question in science: a signal versus noise problem. Natural processes, erosion, wind patterns, mineral deposits, create countless patterns that look random, yet sometimes mimic what humans create. A line of rocks shaped by wind may resemble a wall. A mineral vein may look like an ancient mine. To discern civilization from geology, we must train ourselves to read differently, not for the obvious forms of culture, but for its fingerprints, buried deep in the Earth's chemistry. And yet, even when we look, we must admit our biases. Archaeology tends to seek what it expects. Excavations focus on river valleys, oases, and sites already known from history. We rarely dig deep into the heart of dunes, because we do not expect to find pyramids beneath them. But expectation shapes discovery. What if we are simply searching in the wrong places, asking the wrong questions? This is what makes the Sahara so haunting. We know it was once fertile. We know it held rivers, forests, and even seas. We know people lived here in the distant past, leaving behind rock art and scattered tools. But could there have been something more? An entire civilization erased by the desert's advance? The core mystery is not whether such a civilization existed. The truth is, we may never know. The question is whether we can learn to recognize the signs if it did. Whether we can see through the silence of sand to glimpse the hidden chapters of Earth's story. Because when we stand at the edge of the Sahara and gaze across its dunes, we are not just looking at emptiness. We are looking at possibility. To understand how the Sahara might conceal the traces of a lost civilization, we must first understand its shifting nature. The desert we see today, The endless dunes, the scorching winds, the near-total absence of water is only one face of a land that has changed again and again through deep time. The Sahara is not fixed. It is a shapeshifter, a living canvas constantly redrawn by climate, by wind, and by the slow rhythms of Earth itself. 12,000 years ago, this desert was not a desert at all. It was green. Vast lakes stretched across what is now barren sand. Fossilized fish, crocodile bones, and hippo remains are found in regions now considered some of the driest on Earth. Rock art carved into cliff faces shows giraffes, elephants, and cattle, images that only make sense in a lush, thriving savanna. For thousands of years, the Sahara was alive with rivers, grasslands, and human communities. Then, in the space of a few centuries, the rains stopped, the land withered. The desert we know today surged back, swallowing everything. And this cycle is not unique. Geological studies show that the Sahara has oscillated between green and arid phases for hundreds of thousands of years. Driven by subtle shifts in Earth's orbit and the tilt of its axis, the climate swings in long rhythms. Every 20,000 years or so, monsoon rains return, filling basins with water, feeding forests and plains, and then, just as suddenly, they vanish. Deserts expand. The land becomes silent once more. Now imagine how destructive this rhythm would be for any civilization. A city built during a green phase might thrive for centuries, its fields rich, its people prosperous. But when the desert returned, it would strike with slow violence. Rivers would dry, fields would turn to dust, people would flee, leaving behind their homes. Within a few generations, the dunes would roll in, dismantling what was left. Deep time, as geologists call it, is merciless. We often think of deserts as places of permanence, but in truth, they are places of erasure. Sand does not preserve, it consumes. Winds scour stone into dust, burying structures and smoothing them beyond recognition. Even rock itself, the most enduring of materials, is not immune. Exposed to temperature swings and endless abrasion, stone crumbles. Over millennia, even monuments like pyramids would vanish under such conditions. The Sahara's landscapes are filled with ghostly reminders of these transformations. Satellite images reveal the outlines of ancient river systems, their beds now dry for tens of thousands of years. Hidden beneath dunes are the remains of megalakes, one of them larger than the entire Caspian Sea. What might those shores have witnessed? Could they have supported not just scattered tribes, but complex societies? Societies that disappeared as the climate turned against them? We know from history how vulnerable civilizations are to environmental change. The Akkadians in Mesopotamia collapsed after prolonged drought. The Maya cities were abandoned after centuries of erratic rainfall. Even Egypt's old kingdom faltered when the Nile failed to flood. These are recent examples, measured in mere millennia. Now stretch the timeline back into deep time. The Sahara has endured not one drought, but dozens. Not one collapse, but a cycle of birth and death repeated endlessly. How many times might life here have begun again, only to be erased by sand? This is the haunting possibility, that civilizations may have risen not once, but many times in the Sahara's past. Each time the land was green, people flourished. Each time the land dried, their memory was buried. Over tens of thousands of years, their traces could vanish so completely that today we walk across their graves without knowing it. And this is why the Sahara remains one of the most enigmatic landscapes on Earth. To look at its sands is to gaze at a palimpsest, a manuscript written over and erased again and again. Beneath every dune lies not just sand, but history. history written in water, erased by drought, and hidden from view. So when we ask whether a hidden civilization could lie beneath the Sahara, the first answer is this: if it ever did, the desert is more than capable of keeping its secret. For this landscape has been perfected by time itself as an agent of forgetting. When we imagine the ruins of a lost civilization, we tend to picture monuments of stone, temples, pyramids, or fortresses rising defiantly against the erosion of time. We assume that if a great society once existed, its legacy would still be visible. But this is a comforting illusion. In reality, evidence is fragile. Even the grandest creations crumble quickly when left alone. And in the Sahara, the world's largest furnace of wind and sand, destruction is accelerated. Consider our own world. If humanity were to vanish tomorrow, what would remain of our cities after just a few centuries? Skyscrapers would rust from within, their steel frames weakened by moisture, then toppled by storms. Concrete, so enduring in our imagination, would begin to fracture as plants grew through its cracks. Glass would break into grains that would scatter into dust. Wooden structures would be gone in decades. Even plastics, which trouble us for their stubborn persistence, would become brittle and disintegrate under relentless sunlight. Now stretch the timeline further. 1,000 years, 10,000, 100,000. What remains then? Perhaps a few stone foundations buried in silt or sand. Perhaps a handful of artifacts entombed in caves. But more likely, almost nothing. The Sahara, with its shifting dunes, would cover, crush, and disperse it all. The desert is not a museum. It does not preserve, it consumes. Sandstorms blast the land like sandpaper, eroding anything left above ground. Temperatures swing violently between day and night, expanding and contracting stone until it splinters. Flash floods carve gullies through dunes, sweeping away what little may have survived. Within just a few millennia, the recognizable outlines of buildings or cities could vanish entirely. This is why archaeologists often speak of preservation bias. The past we know is the past that happened to survive, not necessarily the past that was most important. Pottery shards, stone tools, bones, these endure because they are durable. Textiles, wood, and most metals vanish. Entire ways of life may have left no trace at all, simply because their materials dissolved in time. And the deeper into history we look, the worse the problem becomes. Imagine, then, a civilization in the Sahara 10,000 years ago, or 50, or 100. If they built in wood, clay, or even soft stone, their homes would now be indistinguishable from the desert itself. If they left behind tools or ornaments of metal, many would have corroded into nothing more than faint mineral stains in the sand. Even bones, the most enduring of organic remains, would have been crushed or dissolved by shifting soils. Picture a city swallowed by dunes, its streets filled with sand, its walls collapsing under the weight of centuries. Slowly, the very idea of the city dissolves. From above, no lines, no angles, no patterns remain, just rippling sand, indistinguishable from the rest of the desert. After enough time, even if you walked directly over its ruins, you might see nothing at all. And yet, the absence of visible ruins does not mean absence of civilization. It means only that the desert has done its work well. It has hidden its memories beneath a surface of silence. This is the challenge of the Sahara. It forces us to confront the fragility of evidence. What we expect to find, monuments, artifacts, bones, are precisely the things least likely to survive in such a hostile landscape. If a civilization once thrived here, it is not surprising that its ruins are invisible. The real surprise would be if anything had endured at all. So when we look across the dunes and see nothing but sand, we must remember, absence is not proof. Silence is not emptiness. In the Sahara, the fragility of evidence is the desert's greatest secret. If paper burns and wood rots, if metal rusts and clay crumbles, what then is left to carry the memory of the world? Geologists will tell you that rock is the memory of Earth. Each layer, each vein, each fossilized fragment is like a page in a book written slowly over millions of years. It is not a book of words, but of chemistry, of minerals, of subtle traces that whisper of what once was. When we hold a piece of stone, we hold time itself. In the Sahara, beneath the dunes, there are rocks that once lay at the bottom of ancient lakes. Their sediments are fine as flour, recording the chemistry of waters long gone. There are cliff faces etched with rock art, images of giraffes, cattle, and hunters, testifying to a greener Sahara only a few thousand years ago. And deeper still, there are fossil riverbeds, now invisible to the eye, but mapped by satellites, flowing in silence under the desert floor. These are fragments of memory, partial and scattered, but they remind us that even a desert has a history. Now imagine if a civilization once lived here. Would its memory also survive in stone? Perhaps not as walls or statues, but as chemical fingerprints locked within sediments. A sudden spike in carbon isotopes, for example, might suggest the large-scale burning of wood or fossil fuels. An unexpected deposit of metals might hint at mining or smelting. A layer of unusual compounds, plastics, synthetics, or radioactive isotopes, might signal technologies long vanished. This is the paradox. Monuments may fall, but chemistry endures. The Earth may forget shapes, but it remembers signals. If we are willing to read its layers carefully, stone becomes not just geology, but archaeology of the invisible. Scientists already use this method to detect the great transformations of life. The thin line of iridium-rich clay at the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene marks the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs. The banded iron formations of ancient rock record the great oxygenation event, more than 2 billion years ago. The sudden disappearance of certain fossils reveals the Permian-Triassic extinction, the greatest die-off in Earth's history. In each case, the rock remembers what everything else forgot. So it may be with lost civilizations. Even if the Sahara has erased their buildings and scattered their bones, the stone may still carry their shadow. Subtle, indirect, and easily misread, but there nonetheless. A concentration of metals out of place. A shift in isotopes too sharp to be natural. A residue of something that should not exist at all. The challenge, of course, is interpretation. The Earth's processes are complex, and natural forces can mimic human signatures. A volcanic eruption can leave strange isotopic patterns. A meteorite impact can scatter rare metals. Shifts in ocean or atmospheric chemistry can produce anomalies that look artificial but are not. To read the Earth's memory is to walk a razor's edge between signal and noise. But this does not make the search futile. It makes it humbling. For it reminds us that if a civilization once thrived beneath the Sahara's green canopy, we may not find its temples. We may not find its artifacts. What we may find instead are traces in stone. Traces that will require patience, skepticism, and imagination to decipher. So the Sahara becomes not just a desert of sand, but a library of rock. A library where most pages are missing, where many are illegible, but where a few fragments remain. If we learn how to read them, we may one day hear the faint echo of voices long lost, speaking not in words, but in the chemistry of the earth itself. If a civilization once lived and died beneath the Sahara's shifting dunes, what remains of it now? Not walls, not temples, not libraries of papyrus. Those would be long gone. What lingers instead, if anything, are signals, chemical fingerprints too small for the eye to see, yet stubborn enough to endure across millennia. The desert may erase forms, but sometimes it preserves chemistry. Imagine holding a pinch of Saharan sand between your fingers. To you, it feels like dust, lifeless and uniform. But under a microscope, each grain tells a story. Some are fragments of ancient quartz, carried from mountains long eroded. Others are remnants of riverbeds that once coursed through the desert, their minerals reshaped by water. Hidden in that same sand, there may also be anomalies, tiny traces of something that does not belong, that whispers of hands shaping nature long ago. One such marker is carbon. All life, all fire, all industry leaves behind carbon. Scientists can measure the ratios of carbon isotopes, carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14, to reconstruct events of the past. A sudden, unnatural spike or drop in these ratios locked within Saharan sediments might point to widespread burning, energy use, or agriculture at a scale greater than nature alone could explain. The Earth remembers not only bones, but also the chemistry of fire. Plastics are another clue, though more speculative. Our own age has created plastics so durable that fragments will persist in sediments for tens of thousands of years. Buried deep and shielded from sunlight, they may survive even longer, forming plastiglomerates, stones fused with plastic fragments. If a prior civilization had invented their own synthetic materials, even ones very different from ours, small residues could remain embedded in desert crusts. They would not look like artifacts. They would look like anomalies, polymers where none should exist. Then there are the radioactive signals. Human civilization, in just a few decades of nuclear technology, has already seeded the Earth with isotopes that will endure for hundreds of thousands of years. Some of these isotopes, like plutonium-244, are vanishingly rare in nature. If future scientists ever find them in ancient sediments, they will know something intelligent was here. Could the Sahara's sands, beneath layers of shifting dunes, preserve such a signal from an older cycle of civilization? Unnatural concentrations of metals may also tell a story. Our industry releases iron, copper, chromium, and rare earths into soils and rivers. If Saharan sands revealed a buried layer rich in such metals, concentrated in ways that geology alone cannot explain, it would be like a faint footprint pressed into stone. Not a statue, not a tablet, but a residue. This, then, is the strange possibility. If a hidden civilization once thrived where the Sahara now stretches, its clearest legacy may not be visible ruins, but invisible chemistry. The desert might carry its memory in isotopes, in residues, in compounds still buried beneath shifting dunes. Yet here is the challenge. Nature is clever, too. Volcanic eruptions can alter carbon levels. Lightning can fuse sand into glass. Meteorites scatter metals across landscapes. Natural processes can mimic artificial ones so convincingly that we may never be certain which is which. The line between geology and archaeology becomes blurred, and in that blur lies mystery. Still, the possibility cannot be dismissed. If the Sahara hides a forgotten civilization, its ghost will not rise as a city from the sands. It will appear as a signal, faint but persistent, encoded in grains of dust. And if we are patient enough, humble enough, we may one day learn to read it. If the desert buries and erases, might it also reveal? Beneath the endless waves of sand, there may lie signatures that cannot be mistaken for mere chance. Metals out of place, gathered in patterns too concentrated, too specific, to be explained by wind and weather alone. The dunes, though silent, may be holding on to fragments of a story long forgotten. Think of how human industry leaves its mark today. Mining operations carve the earth open, scattering debris. Smelting plants release heavy metals into soil and rivers. Cities concentrate iron, copper, and aluminum in ways nature rarely does. Even when buildings vanish, these elemental traces remain, ghosts of activity locked into the ground. Now imagine searching the Sahara for such echoes. If a civilization once thrived here, we might not find its monuments, but we could find its metals. Already, geologists have uncovered anomalies across North Africa. Ancient deposits of copper and iron, often in locations far from modern mining. Some are explained by natural mineral veins, yet others show signs of unusual concentration, as if something disturbed and redistributed them. Were these formations purely geological? Or could they be the faint scars of industry, smoothed over by tens of thousands of years? Consider also gold. The Sahara has long been tied to the myths of hidden cities of gold, whispered in legends like the lost oasis of Zerzura. Today, artisanal mining still uncovers small veins of precious metals in the desert's heart. If such veins were tapped in ages past, their waste piles, slag heaps, and tools would almost certainly have vanished. But the chemical imbalance in the soil might remain, a thin signature of extraction, detectable only under close study. Rare earths offer another path. In our own age, they are critical to electronics, magnets, and advanced technologies. If another civilization once harnessed them, their residues could persist in sand. These elements do not decay quickly. They linger, their presence a quiet signal of processes beyond nature's ordinary flow. But here too lies a caution. Nature itself is capable of creating patterns that resemble human fingerprints. Volcanic eruptions scatter metals over vast regions. Meteorite impacts seed nickel and iridium into soil. Even slow groundwater movement can concentrate minerals into seams that mimic the scars of mining. Distinguishing what is natural from what is cultural is among the hardest tasks in deep-time archaeology. And yet, the possibility remains. What if, buried deep within Saharan sediments, we were to find a sudden layer rich in copper and slag, unrelated to volcanism? What if isotopic analysis revealed smelting, an artificial process, rather than geologic sorting? It would not be a monument or a statue, but it would be undeniable, a human hand, preserved not in form, but in chemistry. Picture it. A desert expedition drilling into the dunes uncovers a stratum darkened by metal residues. To most, it looks like dust and stone. But under analysis, it reveals ratios that should not exist. Iron combined in ways nature does not arrange. Rare elements grouped with precision. Suddenly, the desert speaks. Not loudly, not clearly, but enough to suggest that long ago, people walked here, worked here, and then vanished, leaving behind only the faintest shadow of their labor. The dunes, then, may be more than emptiness. They may be a vault, hiding the story of a people who turned stone into metal, metal into tools, and tools into lives we can no longer see. Their legacy, erased from sight, might still shimmer in the chemistry of sand. If a hidden civilization once thrived in the Sahara, one of its most enduring legacies might not be temples or monuments, but fields. Agriculture, after all, is one of the strongest signatures of organized human life. The act of turning wild land into cultivated land, of shaping soil, water, and plants, leaves behind traces that last long after farmers vanish. Even in deep time, the earth remembers when it was plowed, sown, and harvested. Today, satellites scanning the Sahara reveal patterns invisible from the ground. Faint lines etched into desert soil, subtle ridges and depressions that suggest the outlines of ancient riverbanks, irrigation channels, and even field systems. Some belong to known cultures of the last few thousand years, but others are older, harder to place, lying deep beneath the sands, their age and purpose uncertain. Could these be the remains of forgotten farms? Agriculture changes landscapes in measurable ways. It alters the chemistry of soil. Crops leave behind microscopic pollen grains and phytoliths, tiny silica bodies within plants, that can survive for tens of thousands of years, fossilized in sediments. A sudden abundance of one plant's pollen appearing in a layer where it should not is a clue. It may signal domestication. It may suggest fields, orchards, or pastures tended by human hands. In the Sahara, researchers have already discovered such anomalies. Layers of sediment show unexpected spikes in pollen from grasses and cereals in places where wild versions are rare. Other layers reveal sudden disappearances of certain plants, as if entire ecosystems had been cleared at once. These are not proofs, but they are signals, hints of landscapes reshaped by more than climate alone. Domesticated animals, too, leave their mark. Herding cattle, goats, or camels transforms vegetation patterns. Grazing pressure alters the balance of plant life, while dung enriches soils with nitrogen in ways that natural ecosystems rarely achieve. In some Saharan sediments, scientists have found precisely these chemical imprints, signs of concentrated animal presence in places where herds should not have gathered without human guidance. Yet farming is fragile in deserts. When rainfall fails, irrigation channels dry. When soils erode, crops vanish. Entire agricultural systems can collapse in decades, their traces hidden beneath drifting dunes. Imagine a network of villages clustered around a green river valley, their fields stretching in ordered rows. As the desert expands, the river shrinks. The land cracks, the people flee. Within centuries, dunes roll in, burying the ridges of plowed earth. Millennia later, all that remains is a faint shift in pollen, a subtle anomaly in nitrogen, a ghost of fields once alive with grain. We know from other parts of the world how enduring such signals can be. In the Amazon, vast terra preta, man-made soils rich in charcoal and nutrients, remain as evidence of farming cultures that vanished thousands of years ago. In Europe, fossilized ridges of ancient plow lines still scar the subsoil beneath modern farms. If these signals survive elsewhere, why not in the Sahara? Why not beneath the dunes, where entire megalakes once spread across North Africa, feeding fertile plains now hidden under sand? To look for farms beneath the Sahara is to look for civilization's quietest traces. No statues, no inscriptions, just altered soils, fossil pollen, and invisible ridges in the earth. Yet these may be more telling than monuments. They reveal daily life, the planting of seeds, the tending of animals, the persistence of human hands shaping the land. And perhaps this is the most haunting thought of all, that beneath the barren surface we see today, there may lie the ghost of a garden that fed people we no longer remember. In fields that blossomed, vanished, and were buried, leaving behind only whispers in the chemistry of sand. Every civilization depends on stability. Rivers must flow, rains must fall, crops must grow. Yet the Sahara reminds us of a sobering truth. Stability is an illusion. The desert has a reset button, and it has pressed it many times before. Each time the climate shifts, it sweeps away whatever came before, leaving the land blank again, as though erasing words from a slate. 10,000 years ago, much of the Sahara was green. Lakes stretched like inland seas, rivers braided across fertile plains. Human groups flourished, carving images of cattle and wildlife into stone. But around 5,000 years ago, the climate swung violently. Monsoon rains faltered, the land dried, rivers withered into dust. Within centuries, the Sahara expanded, reclaiming valleys and plains and dunes of gold. The green Sahara was gone. Now imagine living through such a collapse. Entire communities would watch their world unravel. A lake that had sustained fishing for generations would shrink, turning to salt. Fields would crack and crumble into dust. Herds would wander farther and farther in search of water, until finally they perished. Villages would empty. Families would migrate, carrying memories of green fields into new lands. And in time, the desert would swallow the traces of their existence. This is not unique to the Sahara. History offers many examples of civilizations undone by environmental change. The Akkadian Empire collapsed in Mesopotamia after prolonged drought. The Mayan cities in Central America declined as rainfall patterns shifted. Even the Nile's rhythms, so dependable, sometimes faltered, bringing famine to Egypt's kingdoms. But the Sahara's resets are on a grander scale. They are not small fluctuations, but sweeping transformations, turning continents from savanna to desert in the space of centuries. What would such resets do to memory? Survivors might carry stories of lost homelands, of vanished waters and fertile fields. Over generations, those stories would become myths. Tales of paradises destroyed, cities lost, gods angered. And when told to descendants who had only ever known the desert, the idea of a green Sahara would seem unimaginable, fantastical, perhaps even divine. Earth itself knows this rhythm well. The fossil record is marked by resets. The KPG event that ended the reign of dinosaurs, the Permian-Triassic extinction that nearly erased life itself. Compared to those cataclysms, the Sahara's shifts are smaller, but the principle is the same. A sudden change, a collapse of ecosystems, followed by erasure. Nature does not preserve, it renews. If a civilization once thrived in the Sahara, it could have been wiped away not by war, not by conquest, but by climate. A shift in rainfall could erase centuries of progress. A creeping drought could dismantle cities without a single battle. And when the last inhabitants walked away, the dunes would roll in behind them, smoothing over their memory until nothing remained. This is why the Sahara is so haunting. It is not just a desert. It is a reminder of how fragile civilizations truly are. We like to believe our cities are permanent, our technologies enduring. But the Sahara whispers otherwise. It shows us that nature has its own reset button, and it does not hesitate to press it. So the question lingers. If we know the desert has erased so much before, how many times has it erased not just landscapes, but civilizations? And how many more times will it erase again? When the desert erases, memory often survives in another form, in story. Myths, legends, and oral traditions carry fragments of truth across generations, even when the landscapes that inspired them are gone. The Sahara, though silent to our eyes, resounds with echoes preserved in human imagination. One of the most enduring tales is that of Zerzura, the legendary White City of the Sahara. Medieval Arab explorers spoke of it as an oasis hidden deep within the dunes, filled with treasures, lush gardens, and pale-skinned inhabitants who guarded secrets unknown to outsiders. Expeditions set out in search of Zerzura for centuries, some returning with tales of strange ruins, others never returning at all. No definitive discovery was ever made, yet the myth persists. Was Zerzura only a mirage of longing? Or could it be a cultural memory of real cities that once flourished during the Sahara's Green Age? The echoes extend beyond Africa. Plato, writing in Greece over 2,000 years ago, described Atlantis, a powerful civilization that was destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe. Scholars debate whether Atlantis was allegory, invention, or distorted memory, but the theme is familiar. A flourishing world, erased suddenly, leaving only stories. Could Plato's tale, shaped through centuries of retelling, be rooted in the same cycles of destruction that shaped the Sahara? Flood myths, too, are nearly universal. From Mesopotamia's Epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical story of Noah, from Hindu traditions of Manu to Native American deluge legends, cultures separated by oceans and centuries speak of a world swept away, of civilizations destroyed, of survivors carrying fragments of knowledge into new lands. Some researchers argue these stories preserve the memory of post-glacial sea rise, when coastlines vanished and landscapes were drowned. Others wonder if they are echoes of even older resets, when deserts expanded and entire ways of life disappeared. Closer to the Sahara, the oral traditions of African peoples carry whispers of vanished kingdoms. The Tuareg tell of lands once fertile, now desert. Stories from West Africa describe mighty cities swallowed by sand. These are not historical records in the strict sense, but neither are they mere inventions. Oral traditions can persist for astonishing spans of time. Aboriginal stories in Australia, for instance, describe coastal flooding events that geological evidence dates to more than 7,000 years ago. If memory can stretch back that far, could fragments of Saharan civilizations linger in myth, stretched and reshaped over millennia? It is tempting to dismiss these tales as fantasy, and caution is wise. Myths are layered with symbolism, morality, and imagination. Yet beneath the embellishment, there may lie kernels of truth, memories of real floods, real collapses, real cities lost beneath water or sand. Perhaps Zerzura was not one city, but many, remembered dimly across centuries. Perhaps Atlantis was not an island across the sea, but a reflection of lost worlds closer to home. The Sahara itself seems to invite such stories. Its vastness feels like a canvas for imagination, its silence like an echo chamber for memory. To stand before its dunes is to feel both awe and unease, as though the land itself were guarding secrets. And perhaps it is. For when history is erased by nature, myth becomes the vessel that carries fragments of truth forward. So when we hear of hidden kingdoms, of white cities and golden oases, of floods and forgotten empires, we should not ask whether they are literally true. We should ask instead, what do they remember? What catastrophe, what collapse, what hidden civilization might have given birth to their echoes? In this way, myths are not proof, but they are signals. They are the cultural counterpart to isotopes in stone, fragile yet enduring, carrying the memory of what the desert has chosen to hide. Every so often, an object emerges from the earth that seems to defy its context. Archaeologists call them out-of-place artifacts, or ooparts. They are discoveries that appear too advanced, too anomalous, or too mysterious to fit comfortably within the accepted timeline of history. Most turn out to have mundane explanations: misidentified minerals, intrusive objects from later periods, or natural formations mistaken for tools. Yet a few continue to provoke wonder, especially when they surface in landscapes as enigmatic as the Sahara. Consider the ancient maps. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, famously shows coastlines of Africa and South America with uncanny accuracy, based, according to its own notes, on older source charts now lost. Some enthusiasts claim it depicts Antarctica before it was covered in ice, though mainstream scholars reject this. Still, the map raises questions. What knowledge was once preserved and later forgotten? Could similar cartographic echoes exist for the vanished rivers and lakes of the Sahara, remembered by civilizations we no longer know? In the desert itself, scattered discoveries fuel speculation. Rock engravings deep in the central Sahara depict not only giraffes and elephants, but geometric patterns, symbols, and images that some interpret as maps or astronomical charts. Mainstream archaeology views them as artistic expressions of pastoral societies, but others wonder, could they encode forgotten knowledge of navigation, astronomy, or sacred geometry? If the desert swallowed a civilization, perhaps its memory survives not in ruins, but in images carved into stone. Then there are the disputed artifacts, stories of metallic spheres, stone tools in unexpected strata, or anomalous carvings found far from water sources. Most are controversial, poorly documented, or explained by natural geology. Yet the very persistence of these tales reflects a deep human intuition that our timeline might be incomplete, that somewhere in the sands lie pieces of a story not yet told. It is important, however, to tread carefully. The desert is deceptive. Minerals form strange shapes. Wind-carved rocks can mimic tools. Salt flats crystallize into geometric patterns that look uncannily artificial. What seems like a potsherd may be nothing more than a fragment of natural stone. Science urges skepticism, reminding us that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Yet skepticism does not erase curiosity. It sharpens it. What if one day, beneath a dune, archaeologists were to uncover a worked object in a layer far older than it should be? A piece of metal smelted with precision, a stone shaped into a gear-like form, a residue of alloy unknown in natural geology. Would we dismiss it as intrusion, or would we allow ourselves to ask the forbidden question, what if? Parts in the Sahara remind us that evidence is not always straightforward. Sometimes it is ambiguous, sometimes misleading, sometimes simply misunderstood. But they also remind us of the value of wonder. For even if most are natural curiosities or modern intrusions, the very possibility they represent, the possibility of hidden chapters in human history, keeps us looking, keeps us questioning. And perhaps that is their true role. Not to prove a hidden civilization existed, but to provoke humility. To remind us that what we know is fragile, and what we do not know is vast. In the shifting sands of the Sahara, where visibility is fleeting and permanence rare, even an ambiguous artifact becomes a kind of signal, a whisper that says, "Search deeper, the story may not be complete." In the desert, truth and illusion walk hand in hand. The Sahara is not only a landscape of emptiness, it is a master of disguise. Its winds sculpt shapes that seem deliberate. Its minerals form colors and patterns that look purposeful, and its shifting dunes bury and reveal in cycles that can trick even trained eyes. If we are searching for the faintest traces of a hidden civilization, we must first accept that the desert is filled with deceptions. Take desert varnish, for instance. On countless exposed rocks across the Sahara, thin black or reddish-brown coatings build up over thousands of years. To the eye, they resemble soot, stains, or even the remnants of fire. Some researchers once thought they might be evidence of ancient industry. In reality, they are natural deposits of manganese and iron oxides, slowly accreted by microorganisms and dust. What looks like the fingerprint of fire may simply be chemistry at work. Wind, too, is a sculptor. Sandstorms batter cliffs and outcrops, carving them into sharp edges and smooth curves. From a distance, they can resemble walls, columns, or even statues. Travelers in the desert sometimes report seeing what appear to be towers or ruins on the horizon, only to find, when approached, nothing but oddly shaped rocks. The line between geology and architecture can be thinner than we imagine. Even mineral veins can deceive. In some parts of the Sahara, bright seams of quartz or salt cut through darker stone, forming straight lines or geometric patterns. To an untrained observer, they might look like ancient roads or foundations, but they are natural fractures, filled in over time by crystallizing minerals. Nature, given enough time, creates geometry that rivals human design. And then there are mirages, the most famous of the desert's illusions. Heat bends light, causing distant objects to shimmer, multiply, or distort. A cluster of palms may appear to be a great city. A pool of water may vanish as one approaches. Imagine how many myths, how many stories of lost oases and hidden kingdoms were born from this simple trick of physics. When memory and illusion meet, the result is legend. This ambiguity makes the search for lost civilizations profoundly difficult. Every anomaly, a line of stones, a curious pattern in sand, a dark stain on rock, demands careful scrutiny. Is it the work of human hands, or the slow artistry of wind, water, and time? Even advanced tools like satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar struggle. They can reveal hidden river channels, buried structures, or unusual densities beneath dunes. But they cannot, on their own, distinguish the artificial from the natural. Interpretation always hangs in the balance, yet perhaps this challenge is part of the desert's lesson. The Sahara invites us to slow down, to question, to resist the temptation of easy answers. Its deceptions remind us that the line between nature and culture is not always clear. Sometimes what looks human is natural, and sometimes what looks natural may, in fact, hold the faint signal of human presence. If a civilization once thrived here, its traces would not appear in sharp relief, like the ruins of Rome or the pyramids of Egypt. They would appear instead as ambiguities, as puzzles, as signals blurred by noise. The desert would cloak them in shapes that confuse, patterns that mislead, chemistry that imitates life. To find truth here is not to uncover monuments, but to learn how to read deception itself. And so the Sahara remains both a desert and a mirror. A mirror in which we see not only the possibility of civilizations past, but the limits of our own perception. It asks us, do we see clearly, or do we see what we expect? And if we cannot tell the difference, how will we ever know what lies hidden beneath its sands? To grasp how easily the desert erases, we need only imagine our own cities subjected to its silence. Thought experiments are powerful because they strip away the illusions of permanence. They force us to see the world not as we wish it to be, but as it truly is, fragile, temporary, and fleeting when measured against deep time. Picture Cairo, sprawling at the edge of the Sahara, its skyline a forest of minarets and towers, its streets crowded with millions. Now imagine that, tomorrow, it is abandoned. No more repairs, no more electricity, no more people to sweep the streets. Within decades, sandstorms begin to creep in from the desert. Dust fills empty windows. Wind tears away roofing. The Nile still flows, but its waters shift course, flooding some neighborhoods while leaving others to crumble. A century later, many of Cairo's great buildings have collapsed. Iron has rusted, concrete has fractured, bridges have fallen into the river. In the suburbs, homes are reduced to rubble, already indistinguishable from the landscape. The desert advances steadily, burying districts in dunes. From the air, only faint outlines remain. Now stretch the timeline to 10,000 years. The Sahara has reclaimed nearly everything. The pyramids, already ancient when modern civilization began, might endure a little longer. Massive, simple, and built of stone. Yet even they would eventually succumb. Wind would blunt their edges, sand would bury their bases, earthquakes could topple them into broken heaps. By then, Cairo as a city would no longer exist. Its memory would survive only as anomalies. A stratum of altered soil here, a residue of metals there, faint chemical fingerprints in sediments. Consider Timbuktu, once a jewel of learning and trade, perched at the edge of the desert. Its mud brick mosques and libraries once housed knowledge that shaped empires. If abandoned today, they would dissolve even faster than Cairo's towers. Mud bricks melt back into soil. Manuscripts rot. Within centuries, Timbuktu would vanish entirely, reduced to dust and memory. And what of our modern world? Its glass towers, steel bridges, and electronic marvels? We assume they are enduring. Yet skyscrapers are fragile compared to stone. Their steel skeletons corrode in decades if untended. Their glass shatters into sand, indistinguishable from desert grains. Even the digital records we prize, servers, drives, networks, would not last more than a century without maintenance. Within millennia, all of it would be gone, erased as thoroughly as if it had never been. If this is true of us, why not of others? If a civilization had flourished in the Sahara 10,000 or even 100,000 years ago, it too would have vanished in this way. Its cities swallowed by sand, its artifacts weathered to dust, its story reduced to chemistry hidden in soil. This thought experiment humbles us. It reminds us that permanence is an illusion, that our greatest works, no matter how imposing, are temporary against the canvas of deep time. And it reshapes our question. Instead of asking, where are the ruins of a lost Saharan civilization? We might ask, what traces could possibly survive long enough to reach us? The answer, as we have seen, is not monuments, but subtle signals, isotopes, metals, residues, myths. A civilization does not need to vanish for lack of greatness. It only needs to vanish into time. So when we stand before the Sahara's dunes and see nothing but emptiness, let us remember, if Cairo, if Timbuktu, if even New York or Tokyo can one day disappear into silence, then perhaps what lies hidden beneath the desert is not absence, but a forgotten world erased by the desert's patient hand. The Sahara's cycles of greening and drying remind us that Earth itself is not stable. It resets, sometimes gently, sometimes violently. To understand how entire civilizations or entire species can vanish without a trace, we must look to the great erasures in Earth's deep history, moments when life itself was forced to begin again. The most famous of these resets is the KPG extinction event, 66 million years ago. A vast asteroid, striking near modern-day Mexico, unleashed energy equal to billions of nuclear bombs. The skies darkened, global temperatures plummeted, forests burned. Within a geological heartbeat, 3/4 of Earth's species were gone, including the dinosaurs that had ruled the land for over 150 million years. Their bones remained, but their world, its ecosystems, its rhythms, its dominion, was wiped clean. Another example lies deeper still. The Permian-Triassic extinction, sometimes called the Great Dying. 250 million years ago, volcanic eruptions and climate upheaval drove over 90% of life on Earth to extinction. Oceans stagnated, atmospheres turned toxic. Entire branches of life's tree were pruned away, leaving behind a planet eerily silent. It took millions of years for life to recover. Why do these deep-time catastrophes matter when we ask about hidden civilizations in the Sahara? Because they show us that erasure is not exceptional, it is fundamental. Earth does not preserve, it renews. Just as the dinosaurs can vanish after tens of millions of years of dominance, so too can a human society vanish after only a few thousand. Compared to these vast resets, the destruction of a city or even a civilization is a whisper in the storm, and the Sahara itself has experienced smaller versions of these resets. The drying of its Great Lakes, the collapse of its rivers, the spread of its dunes, each was, in its own way, an extinction event. Not for species across the globe, but for cultures that depended on water, for herds that grazed its plains, for settlements that thrived when the land was green. Their erasure was not sudden like the asteroid, but gradual, unfolding over centuries until memory was swallowed whole. When we consider the possibility of a hidden Saharan civilization, we must think in these terms, not in decades or centuries, but in deep time. 1,000 years is nothing to geology. 10,000 years is enough to bury cities. 100,000 years is enough to erase them almost entirely. By the scale of Earth's resets, even the proudest achievements dissolve into silence. This perspective brings humility. Our monuments, our cities, even our technologies are not immune. If Earth can wipe away the dinosaurs, if it can erase entire oceans of species, then it can certainly erase a forgotten people of the Sahara. The desert is not unusual in this regard. It is simply one of Earth's many erasers, one of its many reset buttons. And so the question becomes not, could such a civilization be erased? But rather, how could it possibly survive? For in a world shaped by resets, survival is the anomaly. Erasure is the rule. Beneath the Sahara's surface lies a ghostly landscape. It is not made of dunes, but of water, rivers that no longer flow, lakes that no longer shine, valleys that once echoed with life but are now silent. To imagine a hidden civilization here, we must first restore these lost waters in our minds, for they were the lifeblood of any society that might once have thrived in the desert's heart. Modern satellites have revealed astonishing discoveries. Beneath hundreds of miles of sand, scientists have traced the channels of ancient rivers, broad as the Nile, winding invisibly through the desert floor. Some, like the Tamanrasset River, once flowed for thousands of kilometers, carrying water from the central Sahara to the Atlantic Ocean. Today, its bed lies buried, its flow extinct. Yet in its time, it would have nourished valleys rich with vegetation, herds, and perhaps human settlements. Equally haunting are the remains of megalakes. One of the greatest, known as Lake Megachad, once spread across an area larger than all of modern France. 10,000 years ago, It was a freshwater sea teeming with fish and crocodiles. Fossils of aquatic life are still found in the sands that now cover its bed. Other basins, like those in Libya and Egypt, also held vast inland seas. For millennia, these lakes were havens in the desert, sustaining not just animals, but human life. Where there is water, there is memory. Archaeologists have discovered tools, pottery fragments, and petroglyphs near ancient shorelines, evidence of human presence when the lakes were full. But what if there was more? What if entire towns once clustered around these waters, their economies built on fishing, farming, and trade? As the lakes dried, those towns would have been abandoned. Their walls collapsed, their fields cracked. Slowly, dunes rolled over them. Today, their traces may still lie hidden, entombed beneath layers of sand. The existence of these ghostly rivers and lakes forces us to rethink the Sahara. We imagine it as barren, but for most of its history, it was alive, fertile, dynamic, a place where humans and animals thrived in ecosystems as rich as any savanna, and each wet phase offered a window in which complex societies could emerge. Each drying phase offered an erasure, a closing of the book. What makes these landscapes especially intriguing is how invisible they are today. To stand in the central Sahara and gaze across the dunes, you would never suspect you were standing on the bed of a vanished river or the shore of a lake larger than modern England. The surface gives no hint of what lies beneath. Only satellite eyes, peering through the desert's veil, reveal the truth. The Sahara is not empty. It is layered. If a hidden civilization lies anywhere in this desert, it is most likely along these buried waters. For water is civilization's anchor. Where rivers flow and lakes gather, people settle. They build. They remember. And when the waters retreat, their memory is buried with them. So perhaps the next time we look at the Sahara, we should not see only dunes. We should see ghostly rivers winding under the sand. We should see megalakes glimmering in silence. We should see, beneath the surface, the possibility of worlds forgotten, civilizations erased not by conquest, but by thirst. If the Sahara has erased so much from its surface, where might traces of its deeper history still survive? The answer may lie underground. Beneath the dunes and cliffs are countless caves and rock shelters, places shielded from the winds, the floods, and the crushing weight of shifting sands. These hidden chambers are nature's time capsules, and they may hold the faintest whispers of civilizations the desert sought to forget. Archaeologists already know the value of caves in preserving memory. In Europe, painted caves like Lascaux and Chauvet carried art across more than 30,000 years. In South Africa, stone tools and hearths sealed in caves reveal the daily lives of early humans over 100,000 years ago. What endures in caves is not grandeur, but intimacy. Handprints, ash, fragments of bone, shards of pottery. Fragile things that the open world would destroy. The Sahara, too, has its caves. Some are adorned with remarkable rock art, paintings and carvings of animals, hunters, and pastoral life. The images are vivid: cattle grazing in fields, swimmers moving through water, people herding and feasting. These artworks testify to a time when the Sahara was green, when communities thrived, and when memory was etched into stone to survive the desert's silence. But what if there is more? What if, deeper in these caves, sealed behind collapsed entrances or buried under sand, lie remnants of settlements far older or more complex than we imagine? Storage chambers filled with tools, seeds, or even written records in a form we no longer recognize. The desert outside may erase relentlessly, but within a cave, artifacts could endure for tens of thousands of years, shielded from wind and heat. Caves also preserve chemical signals. Ash from ancient fires leaves distinct layers that can be dated. Bones absorb isotopes that reveal diets, migrations, and environments. Pollen trapped in cave sediments tells of vanished landscapes outside. Each layer is a page in the Earth's memory, written not in words, but in chemistry and biology. In the Sahara, where surface evidence is fragile, these hidden pages may be the most reliable source of forgotten history. And there is something profoundly symbolic about caves. Across cultures, they are seen as gateways, portals to the underworld, wombs of the earth, sanctuaries of hidden truth. Perhaps it is no coincidence that if the Sahara guards its secrets, it may do so in caves, keeping them sealed until the right moment of discovery. Of course, caution is needed. Not every cave hides treasure. Many are barren, filled only with silence and stone, but we cannot dismiss the possibility that some hold the memory of civilizations erased from the surface. Already, remote sensing has revealed networks of subterranean chambers across North Africa, many unexplored, their entrances buried. Each could be a library of time, waiting to be opened. So the next time we look across the Sahara and see only emptiness, we should remember what lies beneath. Hidden caves and rock shelters may be the keepers of the desert's deepest secrets. They may preserve the fragile traces of lives, stories, and perhaps even civilizations that the sands above have erased. In the end, if the desert has a memory, it may not be written on its surface, but carved into its hidden chambers, waiting in darkness for the patient hand that will one day bring it back to light. When we think of discovering a hidden civilization, we imagine drama, walls jutting out of dunes, statues rising from the sand, libraries uncovered by explorers with torches. But the truth is far quieter. If such a civilization ever existed in the Sahara, its traces would likely not appear as ruins at all. They would appear as signals, small, ambiguous, and easy to miss. This is because not all civilizations leave behind monuments. Some leave behind chemistry. Others leave behind patterns in soil, shifts in ecosystems, or residues that look natural to an untrained eye. If we are not asking the right questions, we may walk past these signals without realizing their significance. Take, for example, engineered stone or composites. Our own civilization produces concrete, asphalt, and alloys that, over time, will break down into forms resembling natural rock. If future geologists stumbled upon fragments of reinforced concrete in 10,000 years, would they recognize it as artificial? Or would it be catalogued as a curious but natural anomaly? Now imagine if a prior society used advanced materials designed to biodegrade. Those signals might already have vanished, or worse, they might persist invisibly, mistaken for nature. Even residues in soil can mislead. A layer of unusual carbon might suggest widespread burning of forests, perhaps a natural wildfire, perhaps deliberate clearing for agriculture. Without context, how do we tell the difference? Similarly, an odd concentration of metals might be read as the result of groundwater movement, when in fact it could be the scar of ancient mining. Nature imitates culture, and culture dissolves into nature. The line is blurred. We also underestimate just how much evidence we overlook because of expectation. Archaeologists dig where they believe they will find artifacts, near oases, river valleys, or known sites. The Central Sahara, vast and seemingly empty, has rarely been excavated deeply. What if signals lie buried there, dismissed as unremarkable sand or stone? What if fragments already sit in museum drawers, catalogued as natural formations, never tested for artificial origins? Even our tools of detection have limits. Satellites can reveal ancient riverbeds and buried structures, but they cannot tell us whether a faint anomaly is geological or cultural. Ground-penetrating radar can detect density changes, but dunes shift constantly, blurring its results. Signals of a lost civilization might already exist in the data, overlooked because no one thought to interpret them in that way. Consider also the role of scale. A great civilization may have left behind signals too small for us to notice. A subtle shift in nitrogen in desert soils, an isolated pocket of unusual isotopes, a handful of pollen grains suggesting domestication. These are not dramatic discoveries. They are whispers, scattered among millions of other natural processes. Yet together, they could form the faint outline of a story waiting to be told. This is the great challenge of deep time. It erases context. A lone artifact means little without surrounding evidence. A chemical anomaly may be dismissed as natural unless supported by multiple lines of proof. And so, even if the Sahara hides signals of a lost people, we may never recognize them. We may already have missed them. But perhaps that is the true lesson. The desert is not simply silent. It speaks in a language we do not yet know how to hear. Its signals are faint, blurred, and fragile. But they are there. If we learn to listen differently, to see beyond monuments and objects, we may one day recognize what lies beneath. Until then, the Sahara keeps its secrets, not by hiding them entirely, but by presenting them in ways too subtle for us to notice. The signals are there. The question is, will we learn to see them? The Sahara's silence is not just emptiness. It is a lesson. It forces us to confront a truth that is often uncomfortable. The absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. In other words, just because we do not see something does not mean it never existed. It may mean only that time, climate, and geology have done their work too well. Modern science thrives on evidence. We look for artifacts, ruins, measurable data. When none appear, we conclude nothing was there. Yet the earth is vast, and our search is narrow. Less than a fraction of the Sahara has been systematically excavated. The sheer scale of it, over 3.5 million square miles, means we have only skimmed its surface. Imagine calling a library empty because you opened a single book and found no words inside. That is the humility the Sahara demands. Absence can be deceptive. Consider Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. For millennia, it lay buried beneath soil, unknown to modern humanity. When it was uncovered, it revealed monumental architecture older than the pyramids, a site that rewrote our understanding of early civilization. Before its discovery, there was no evidence that such complexity existed at that time. Yet there it was, hidden not by malice, but by time. The Sahara may hold many Göbekli Tepes, sites not lost, but simply not yet found. And even if most have been erased, some fragments may still endure. A shard of pottery sealed in a cave, a foundation stone buried beneath a dune, a cluster of isotopic anomalies preserved in sediment. Each would be faint, incomplete, but enough to remind us that absence is not a final verdict. The humility of absence also extends to myth and memory. Legends of Zerzura, of kingdoms swallowed by sand, may sound fantastical. Yet they remind us that people have always sensed that the desert hides more than it reveals. Just as fossils hinted at vanished creatures long before paleontology confirmed them, Myths may carry whispers of truths not yet verified. What makes the Sahara's absence so powerful is not just what it withholds, but what it suggests. If a civilization can be so thoroughly erased that even its ruins are invisible, what does that mean for us? If Cairo or Timbuktu were abandoned tomorrow, how long before their memory dissolved as completely as a lost Saharan city? How many of our own achievements would survive beyond the horizon of deep time? In the end, the desert teaches humility. It reminds us that we do not know as much as we think, that history is not a straight line, and that silence does not always mean emptiness. It asks us to hold two thoughts at once: skepticism, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and wonder, because the absence of evidence may itself be evidence of the Earth's ability to forget. Perhaps the Sahara's greatest gift is this perspective. It is not proof of lost civilizations, nor denial of them. It is the reminder that our knowledge is partial, provisional, and small compared to the scale of time. To look into its silence is to feel humility, and in that humility, the possibility that history is deeper, stranger, and more mysterious than we dare to imagine. The Sahara's silence is not unique. It is part of a larger truth. Earth itself is a planet that forgets. Its surface is in constant motion, eroding, shifting, folding, and swallowing what came before. What survives to reach us is not the full story of history, but fragments, the lucky remnants that escaped the planet's natural erasers. Consider plate tectonics. Over millions of years, entire land masses are recycled. Ocean floors are dragged back into the mantle. Continents drift, mountains rise, and valleys sink. Anything built upon them is doomed to vanish. The oldest ocean crust on Earth is only about 200 million years old, a blink of geological time. Everything older has been erased, melted, transformed. If civilizations had ever risen in deep prehistory, their foundations may have already been folded back into the Earth itself. Erosion is another relentless force. Rivers carve valleys, carrying away soil grain by grain. Wind scours stone into dust. Glaciers advance and retreat, grinding mountains into rubble. In deserts like the Sahara, this process is magnified. Dunes roll like slow oceans, burying and uncovering again, ensuring nothing stays in place for long. Even the hardest stone yields eventually. What chance, then, would fragile walls, tools, or carvings have over 10 or 20,000 years? Floods and sea level rise erase, too. At the end of the last ice age, oceans rose more than 100 meters, drowning vast coastlines where human communities once lived. Today, most of humanity resides near coasts. If we disappeared, many of our cities would one day be lost beneath the sea. Could the same have happened before? Could Saharan rivers and lakes have once supported settlements now buried beneath desert sands or drowned beneath shifting waters? The Earth is a master of renewal. Forests grow over ruins. Deserts expand across fertile plains. Volcanic ash blankets valleys. What survives is not chosen, but accidental. Stone tools persist because they are durable. Pottery fragments endure because they are baked hard. But knowledge written on wood, cloth, or skin vanishes. Entire cultures, entire peoples, may have risen and fallen without leaving a trace we can recognize. And here lies the paradox. We call history what remains, but the majority of human and pre-human experience may already be gone. The Sahara reminds us of this every time we look across its emptiness. For what we see is not just sand, it is absence, curated by the planet itself. This is why humility is essential. Our species often imagines itself as the pinnacle of time, as though nothing like us has ever existed before. Yet the Earth's capacity to forget should give us pause. Civilizations may have come and gone before, their stories erased not by enemies, but by wind, water, and stone. We may not be the first to build, the first to dream, the first to fall. When we say the Sahara is silent, perhaps we are wrong. Perhaps it is not silent at all. Perhaps it is simply unreadable, its pages turned by the planet's hand until only fragments remain. Earth forgets, yes, but in its forgetting, it leaves mysteries. And mysteries, if nothing else, remind us that the story is far larger than the fragments we hold. The Sahara stretches before us like an ocean of silence, vast, unbroken, and humbling. To most, it is a desert, empty and lifeless. Yet as we have seen, it is also a palimpsest, a manuscript written and erased by time. Beneath its sands lie buried rivers, vanished lakes, fossil farms, and perhaps even traces of civilizations long forgotten. What we see as emptiness may in truth be concealment, a silence not of absence, but of erasure. We know that Earth forgets. We have seen how cities vanish in centuries, how forests reclaim ruins, how oceans rise and deserts expand. We know that myths echo memories, carrying fragments of truth in the language of story. We know that chemistry, metals, isotopes, and pollen preserve whispers that architecture cannot. The question is not whether the Sahara could hide a civilization. It is whether we are prepared to see its faintest signals, to read the desert as more than sand. Perhaps one day we will uncover a shard of undeniable evidence, an artifact in a stratum too old for coincidence, a residue in the soil that defies natural explanation, a buried settlement revealed by shifting dunes. Or perhaps the Sahara will guard its secrets forever, leaving us only with speculation, imagination, and humility. In either case, the desert remains what it has always been, a mirror. It reflects not only the past, but our own assumptions about permanence, progress, and fragility. So tonight, as we leave the question open, let us rest with the mystery. The Sahara does not answer quickly. Its silence is patient, its memory subtle, its truth layered in stone and sand. We may never know if a civilization once thrived beneath its golden waves. But the possibility itself is enough to change the way we see the world. For if the Sahara hides forgotten peoples, what else might the earth be hiding? What other deserts, forests, or oceans guard chapters of history erased from our sight? How many civilizations has the planet already forgotten, and how many more will it forget after ours? The desert whispers to us in silence. History is not a line, but a cycle. Civilizations rise, flourish, and vanish, leaving only faint traces in the memory of stone. Perhaps the Sahara is one such memory, still hidden, still waiting. The final question, then, is not whether we will find that lost civilization. It is whether we will learn from the desert's lesson that nothing lasts forever, and that the earth remembers only what it chooses to. What other civilizations might lie hidden beneath the world's deserts, waiting for us to ask the right question?